When my dad screamed, "All you do is take. You've never given this family anything," something inside me broke in a way that could never be fixed. The words hit me like a slap. I stood in the kitchen, holding the bills I had just paid with money from my second job. My dad's face was red, his voice sharp and full of anger. I didn't even know what I had done wrong this time. The old fridge hummed behind me. My mom sat silent on the couch, and my brother Colt just stared at his phone like it wasn't his problem. It never was. For years, I had been the one keeping this house from falling apart. I worked late shifts at the diner, gave up my weekends, and sent every spare dollar home so my parents wouldn't lose the house. I never said no, not once. I thought that was love, doing whatever it took to keep them happy. But hearing my dad say I'd never given anything, it made everything inside me go still. I remember the smell of burnt coffee and the soft ticking of the wall clock. My dad kept shouting about how I didn't appreciate the family sacrifices. He said Colt was trying, while I was selfish. Colt, who hadn't worked in months, who borrowed my car and brought it back with an empty tank. Colt, who somehow always got defended no matter how much he messed up. I wanted to laugh or scream or tell them everything I'd done for them. But I didn't. Instead, I looked at my mom. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She just twisted a napkin in her hands, the same way she always did when Dad started yelling. I realized then that this was never going to change. No matter how much I gave, they'd never see it. To them, I'd always be the disappointment, the one who took. Something in me snapped quiet that night. I didn't yell back. I didn't cry in front of them. I just folded the bills, set them on the counter, and said, "You're welcome." My voice sounded strange, calm, steady, not mine. Then I walked past my dad, past Colt, past all the things I used to care about. Outside, the night air was cold. The porch light flickered behind me, and I could still hear my dad's voice through the screen door, muttering about how ungrateful I was. But I kept walking down the gravel driveway until I couldn't hear him anymore. My hands were shaking, but I felt lighter than I had in years. That was the night I decided I was done begging for their love. Done trying to prove my worth to people who never wanted to see it. I didn't know what came next, but I knew one thing for sure. I was never going back inside that house again. Growing up, I used to think my family was normal. We lived in a small town in Ohio, in a faded yellow house with a front porch that leaned a little to the left. My dad, Warren, worked long hours at a machine shop and liked to remind everyone that he was the reason we had a roof over our heads. My mom tried to keep the peace, even when her hands shook from stress. And then there was Colt, my older brother, the golden child. He could do no wrong, even when everything he touched fell apart. When I was 16, I started working part-time after school. It wasn't a choice. My dad said I needed to learn responsibility. But the money I made didn't go to clothes or friends or anything for me. It went straight to the family, groceries, the electric bill, sometimes even my dad's beer. I told myself it was temporary, that once I finished school and went to college, things would change. But college never happened. My dad lost his job for a few months, and the bills piled up. He looked at me across the dinner table one night and said, "Family comes first, Lena. You can take classes later." So I took on more hours at the diner and gave up the scholarship I'd worked for. I told myself it was the right thing to do, that they'd be proud of me for helping. They weren't. Colt wrecked my car when he was 19. He was drunk, but my dad told the police I'd been driving because it'd ruin Colt's future. I stayed quiet because that's what I always did, protect him, protect them, and carry the weight. When $200 went missing from the house, my dad said, "Lena probably misplaced it." I hadn't. Colt later admitted he took it, laughing about it like it was no big deal. My dad just patted his shoulder and said, "Boys make mistakes." Every time something went wrong, I was the one who got blamed, or worse, ignored completely. My mom would pull me aside sometimes, whispering, "Don't take it personally, honey. Your dad just expects more from you." But it never felt like that. It felt like I was invisible until they needed something. By the time I turned 21, I had been working nonstop for 5 years. No one said thank you. No one noticed the food on the table came from my paycheck. They all acted like I owed them. I didn't realize it then, but they had trained me to always give, and never expect anything in return. Looking back now, I see it so clearly. Every sacrifice I made just proved to them that I would keep doing it. I was the safety net they didn't have to appreciate. And somewhere in all those years of quiet giving, something inside me started to go cold. I didn't want to be their savior anymore. I wanted them to finally see what it felt like when I stopped giving. When I finally moved out, it didn't feel like a big moment. There were no goodbyes, no tears, no one helping me pack. I left on a quiet Sunday morning with 2 suitcases and a box of dishes I bought from a thrift store. My dad didn't ask where I was going. He just muttered something about me running off again, and went back to watching TV. My mom stood in the doorway, wringing her hands, but she didn't say a word. I think she knew it was time for me to go, even if she couldn't say it out loud. I found a tiny apartment above a laundromat in town. It smelled faintly of detergent and old wood, but to me it felt like freedom. The rent was cheap, the walls were thin, and the floor creaked when I walked, but it was mine. For the first few nights, I couldn't sleep. The silence was strange after years of shouting and slammed doors. But then I started to get used to it. I'd sit by the window with a cup of coffee, watch the streetlights, and remind myself that I didn't owe anyone anything anymore. Life slowly became routine. I worked mornings at the diner, just like before, but I picked up an evening shift at a bookstore across town. During my breaks, I studied online, business courses, small certifications, anything that made me feel like I was moving forward. I didn't have much money, but every paycheck I saved a little, and every week I felt a little stronger. At the diner, I met Evelyn Marks. She was in her early 30s, loud in the best way, and had this easy laugh that made everyone else smile. She'd been through her own rough patch, a messy divorce, bad family ties, and somehow she understood me without me having to explain. We'd sit outside after shifts, eating fries from a paper cup, talking about everything and nothing. She'd say, "Lena, you gotta stop fixing everyone else's life and start living yours." I'd laugh, but part of me knew she was right. Things were finally feeling steady until one afternoon at the bank. I had gone in to check on my old savings account, the one I opened years ago with my parents to save for college. It was supposed to have a few thousand left, money I'd earned from all those years working. When the teller looked up at me and said the balance was 0, I thought there had to be a mistake. She showed me the statement. The withdrawals were from 2 years ago, large amounts, all leading to one account. Colts. My stomach dropped. My name had been quietly removed from the account. I stood there, staring at the paper, realizing my parents had used everything I'd saved to pay off my brother's credit card debt. That moment changed everything. The sadness I used to feel turned into something colder, sharper. I didn't cry. I didn't call them. I just walked out of the bank and stood on the sidewalk, the paper trembling in my hand, and thought, they think I'll never fight back. They were wrong. The next morning, I went back to the bank. I needed to see it for myself, to know it wasn't just some mix-up. The woman at the counter was polite, but her smile faded when I asked for copies of the account records. She led me to a small office and handed me a folder full of papers. My hands shook a little as I flipped through them. Then I saw it, my name scratched out in neat ink, and a new signature written where mine should have been. It wasn't my handwriting. The date was from 2 years ago, around the time my dad said the bank had updated some forms. He'd asked me to sign something quickly back then, said it was routine. I didn't think much of it. I was tired from work and trusted him, like I always did. Now, looking at that forged signature, something inside me turned to ice. He hadn't just lied to me. He'd taken something that was mine and erased me like I didn't exist. The bank couldn't do much. They said the matter was internal, and that I could file a fraud report if I wanted to. The word fraud sounded too clean for what it really was. I walked out of there numb, clutching the papers like they were proof that my whole life had been a lie. That night, I sat in my small apartment with the documents spread out across the table. I stared at the signature until my eyes burned. For the first time, I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry, just cold, steady. I folded the papers carefully and put them in a folder. Then I started printing my bank statements, text messages, and every receipt that tied me to that account. When I told Evelyn what happened, she was furious. She slammed her coffee cup down so hard it nearly spilled. "Lena, that's fraud. You should go to the police or hire a lawyer." I shook my head. "Not yet." She looked at me like she couldn't understand. "Why not?" "Because," I said quietly, "if I do it now, they'll play the victims. They'll twist it. I need to be smart about this." Evelyn didn't argue after that. She just sighed and said, "Then at least don't let them get away with it forever." "I won't," I promised. That night, I started a file box under my bed. It was small, just plain black plastic, but to me it felt like a shield. I labeled it for later. Every few days, I added something new: documents, messages, copies of my paychecks, notes about conversations I remembered. Piece by piece, I built my quiet case, the truth I'd one day use. For years, my father had kept control by yelling. Now, I didn't need to yell back. I had something better: proof and time. A few months passed before I heard anything from my family again. Then one evening, my phone rang. It was my dad. His voice sounded forced, too cheerful, like he was trying to hide something. He said, "Hey, kiddo, have you been? Haven't seen you in a while." He hadn't called me kiddo in years. I could almost hear the awkward silence behind his words. I knew right then he needed something. He didn't mention what happened between us. Instead, he talked about how things had been tough lately. Colt had lost his job, and the bills were stacking up. Mom's health had gotten worse too, and her medical expenses were eating up what little money they had. I listened quietly, giving small replies, pretending I didn't already know what kind of man I was talking to. After a long pause, he said, "Maybe you could come by sometime. Your mom misses you." I agreed, but my voice was calm even. "Sure, Dad. I'll stop by this weekend." He sounded relieved, maybe even proud of himself, like he'd done something brave just by asking. When I went to the house that weekend, it felt smaller somehow. The paint was peeling, the grass was overgrown, and the living room smelled faintly of medicine and dust. Mom looked tired but happy to see me. She hugged me tighter than she used to, like she was afraid I'd disappear. Colt was there too, sitting on the couch in his old sweatshirt, staring at the floor. He barely said hi. I noticed the unopened bills stacked on the coffee table, all of them marked past due. Dad came in from the kitchen, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. He started asking questions about my job, my apartment, my life. He called it catching up. But I could feel him circling the topic he really wanted to talk about: money. When he finally brought it up, he said it like it wasn't a big deal. "We're just a little behind, you know. Nothing serious. Maybe you could help with a few payments until things smooth out." I nodded, pretending to think. "I'll see what I can do," I said softly. He smiled, thinking he had me again. But I didn't give them everything. Just enough to keep them steady. A few grocery runs, a small check for Mom's medicine. Nothing they could use to climb back up. Just enough so they wouldn't fall completely apart. They didn't notice the shift, but I did. For the first time, they were the ones waiting for my help, not demanding it. When I left that evening, I sat in my car for a long time, watching the lights in their house flicker on. I wasn't angry anymore. I was patient. They thought I was still the same Lena, still too soft to fight back. But they were already leaning on me again, and this time, I was the one in control. I started visiting the house more often after that, mostly to help my mom with her medicine. She was getting weaker, and the bills kept growing. Every time I stopped by, my dad acted polite but distant, like he couldn't decide whether to thank me or resent me. I didn't argue or ask for explanations. I just told him I'd take care of the payments directly, so Mom wouldn't have to stress about it. He didn't like the idea, but he didn't have much choice. At first, he tried to act like he was still in charge. He'd mumble about how a man should handle family money. But when I showed him the overdue notices and receipts, his face turned red, and he went quiet. Eventually, he gave in. I told him I'd manage the bills through a separate account, so everything stayed organized. He nodded reluctantly. I could see the pride slipping out of him little by little, but I didn't care anymore. Once I started managing things, I made sure to do it properly. I checked every statement, every piece of mail, every small charge. Most of it was normal: utility bills, medical costs, a few credit cards. But one file caught my attention. It was a statement from my mom's retirement account. Something about the balance looked off. The numbers didn't match what she'd told me a few years back. I logged into the account and saw a withdrawal from months earlier. Tens of thousands of dollars gone. The record showed my dad's name. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen. It was almost unbelievable, and yet it wasn't surprising at all. He'd taken part of her retirement to pay off Colt's debts again. The same son who never held a job for more than a few weeks. The same brother who still slept on their couch, playing video games while my mom coughed in the next room. I could have confronted him right there. I could have shouted, thrown the papers on the table, demanded answers. But I didn't. I just printed everything, placed it in a folder, and added it to the growing box I kept under my bed. It was getting heavier now, full of the things they thought I'd never find out. When my dad asked later if I had paid the bills, I smiled and said yes. He thanked me, his voice tight, like the words hurt. He didn't know that every time he handed me another receipt or another statement, he was also handing me more control. That night, I sat by the window in my apartment, the streetlight casting thin lines across the floor. I didn't feel sad or angry anymore. Just calm. He had taken everything he could from me, money, trust, even my name on a piece of paper. Now, I was the one quietly taking back what he'd stolen, one step at a time. It took months to put everything in place, but I was careful with every step. My mom's health kept getting worse, and she relied on me more each week. My dad had stopped pretending everything was fine. He was tired, angry, and always looking for someone to blame. Colt was still living at home, spending his days sleeping or pretending to look for work. I started to realize that if I didn't act soon, my mom's small savings would be gone just like the rest of it. One afternoon, while my dad was out, I sat with my mom at the kitchen table. I told her I wanted to move her money into her name only, so no one else could touch it, not even Dad. She looked nervous at first, her hands trembling slightly. "Your father won't like that," she said softly. I smiled and said, "He doesn't have to like it. It's yours, Mom. You earned it." She hesitated, then nodded. I could see the relief in her eyes, like she'd been waiting for someone to finally take control. Over the next few weeks, I met with a financial advisor and helped transfer everything. Her savings, her small pension, even the house documents, so they were legally in her name alone. I made sure every paper was signed correctly, every box checked. My dad and Colt were completely left out of it. They had no idea what I was doing. Once everything was set, I helped my mom apply for a senior apartment in town. It was a small place, clean and quiet, with kind neighbors. She liked the idea of having her own space, though she was scared to leave. On moving day, I packed her clothes and photo albums while she sat on the couch watching me, her eyes watery but calm. "Do you think your dad will be mad?" she asked. I paused for a second, then said, "Probably. But this isn't about him anymore." When we left the house, I didn't tell my dad where we were going. By the time he noticed her things were gone, it was too late. He called me that night, his voice shaking with anger. "What did you do, Lena? You think you can just take your mother away from me? You're stealing my family." I didn't yell back. I just said quietly, "You did that the day you forged my name." He went silent. For a long time, there was nothing but the sound of him breathing hard through the phone. Then he hung up without another word. I sat there afterward, the phone still in my hand, feeling something shift inside me. The power he used to have over me was gone. He couldn't shout me down or guilt me anymore. For the first time, he was the one who had to live with what he'd done. And I was finally free to protect the only person in that house who ever truly loved me. After my mom moved into her new apartment, things began to change fast. She looked healthier within weeks. Her face wasn't as pale, her hands didn't shake as much, and she even started going on short walks in the morning. Without the constant shouting and stress, she seemed lighter, almost like a different person. Every time I visited, she'd have tea waiting, and we'd sit by her small window, talking about simple things: the weather, the flowers outside, the neighbor's dog. For the first time in years, our conversations didn't end in tears or silence. Back at my dad's house, things were falling apart. I didn't have to ask, the signs were obvious. He called a few times, leaving short messages that sounded more desperate each week. Then Colt called once too, his voice unsure, asking if I knew why the bank was sending them letters. I didn't answer. I knew exactly why. The house was behind on taxes, and with no money left, there wasn't much they could do. I drove by one day, just to see it for myself. The paint was peeling worse than before, and the grass had grown up past the porch steps. There was a yellow notice taped to the door. I didn't get close enough to read it, but I already knew what it said. They were losing the house. The same house where my dad had screamed that I'd never given anything. I stood there for a moment, then turned the car around and drove away. I didn't feel proud or happy. It wasn't about revenge that made me smile. It was the quiet knowledge that they were finally facing the truth of what they'd done. For years, I had carried their problems on my back. Now they had to stand on their own, and they couldn't. A few weeks later, my dad called again. I almost didn't answer, but something in me wanted to hear his voice one last time. When I picked up, he tried to sound calm, but I could hear the fear underneath. He said the house was gone, and that they didn't have anywhere to stay yet. He talked in circles, trying to sound proud, but then finally asked what he really wanted to say. "Lena, I wouldn't ask if I had another choice. Could you help us out? Maybe just a small loan until things get sorted." I let the silence stretch between us. I thought about the night he yelled at me, the forged papers, the years of being blamed for everything. My hand felt steady as I held the phone. "Dad," I said slowly, "I gave you everything once. You spent it." He didn't speak for a long moment. Then I heard him exhale a long, heavy sound, and the line went dead. I sat there with the phone in my lap, staring at the wall. There was no joy, no victory, just peace. For the first time, he couldn't take anything from me. I had nothing left to give, and that was finally enough. A few weeks passed without a word from my dad. I didn't expect to hear from him again. Then one afternoon, I found an envelope in my mailbox with his handwriting on it. My stomach tightened the moment I saw my name written on the front. I carried it inside, set it on the table, and stared at it for a long time before opening it. The paper inside was wrinkled and slightly torn at the edges. His handwriting was messy, like he'd written it in a rush. The first few lines sounded strange, almost formal, like he didn't know how to start. He wrote that he hoped I was doing fine, and that Mom seemed to be adjusting well in her new place. Then came the words I knew were coming. "I'm sorry if I said things I shouldn't have." He didn't say what things. He didn't mention the forgery, the yelling, or the years he'd made me feel small. Instead, he blamed everything on stress, on Colt's mistakes, on the pressure of holding a family together. He said he had always wanted the best for me, but hadn't known how to show it. Then, near the end, he wrote something that made my throat tighten. "You were always the strong one, Lena. Maybe that's why I pushed you so hard." I read the letter twice. It wasn't much of an apology, but a small part of me had wanted to believe it anyway. I thought about all those nights I'd wished he would just say sorry, even once. Now that it was finally in front of me, it felt empty. The words were too late, too careful, too practiced. I folded the letter neatly and carried it to the kitchen. The apartment was quiet, only the sound of the refrigerator humming. I placed the letter in the sink, struck a match, and touched the flame to the edge of the paper. It caught quickly, curling and blackening, the handwriting disappearing into smoke. I watched until it turned to ash. Tears filled my eyes, but I didn't try to stop them. They weren't the kind of tears that begged for comfort or forgiveness. They were quiet tears, tired ones, the kind that wash away the last pieces of something that's already gone. I stood there, letting them fall until the smoke faded and only a few ashes remained in the sink. When I turned off the faucet and watched the ashes swirl down the drain, I felt something shift inside me. The ache I'd carried for years, the one that came from wanting their approval, their love, their recognition, was lighter now. It wasn't gone completely, but it no longer controlled me. For the first time, I didn't need him to see my worth. I didn't need his apology to make peace. I had already built my own kind of closure, quiet and real, in the life I made without him. The morning I went to visit my mom for the last time, the air felt calm. The sun was soft through the trees, and for once, my chest didn't feel heavy. She opened the door before I even knocked, smiling the way she used to when I was little. Her hair was thinner, her steps slower, but her eyes were bright. We sat at her small kitchen table, the same one I'd helped her move into the apartment months ago. She poured us both tea and said, "You look happier, Lena." I smiled. "I think I am." We talked for hours, mostly about simple things, her new neighbors, the flowers she planted outside her window, a cooking class she wanted to try. Every few minutes, she'd reach over and touch my hand, as if to make sure I was really there. When I told her I had accepted a new job out of state, her smile faded a little. "You're leaving soon, then?" "Next week," I said. "It's a good opportunity. I think it's time." She nodded, though I could see the sadness behind her eyes. "You've done enough here," she said softly. "Go live your life. Don't look back." I promised I wouldn't. After we finished our tea, I helped her wash the cups. The small moments felt heavier than they should have. I walked through her apartment one more time. The photos on the walls, the soft hum of her radio, the smell of lavender. Everything about it felt safe, peaceful. She had found her own kind of calm, and knowing that made it easier for me to go. Before leaving, I reached into my bag and pulled out an old family photo. It was taken years ago, back when I still believed everything was fine. My dad had his arm around Mom, and Colt was standing between them, grinning like he had no worries in the world. I looked at it for a moment, then carefully tore the photo in half. I handed the part with me and Mom to her. "This one belongs here," I said quietly. She looked at the photo and smiled through tears. "You sure?" "Yeah," I said. "I only want to take the part that feels real." She didn't ask what that meant. She didn't need to. I hugged her for a long time before walking out to my car. When I started the engine, she stood at the window, waving the way she always did when I left for school years ago. The sun flickered through the trees as I drove away, the road stretching out in front of me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost or what had been taken from me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just free from the weight, the guilt, and the need to be loved by people who never really saw me. The peace I had now wasn't given to me. I earned it by letting go.